low-key, I was thinking, right, chat? Because obviously the Pochettino news kind of came out. How are you guys feeling about that one? I can't lie, chat. That's big. That one right there is a big one. And I feel like it's low-key going under the radar. I really do. Because think about it, right? World Cup in 2 years. I genuinely think people are not aware of like how big of a deal it is that the US is hosting the World Cup. Again, let me tell you guys this, yeah? I work in football. I work for a lot of different companies. And over the last few years, I've worked for like the biggest companies, basically. Social media, Bleacher Report, FTBL. I've worked with and spoken to people from Copa 90. Let me tell you guys this right now, right? Every single brand, every single company, every single broadcaster, every single person working in this industry, like even outside of the US, everybody has their eyes on the World Cup. Because the reality is, yeah, the US hosting a successful World Cup in their own backyard could completely change the way that sport is consumed in that country. Completely change it. Like, you guys don't understand, yeah? Football or soccer to you guys has grown a lot in the last 10, 15 years. I grew up in the US. I literally watched it go from a sport that no one in my school even spoke about to like 5, 6 years later. Everybody knew who Messi and Ronaldo and Neymar was and Wayne Rooney. And then 10 years later, people are watching the Premier League. I watched it in front of my very eyes, being the only person in my entire school who ever wore football jerseys, ever watched games, to like a decade later, everybody was talking to me about it. I witnessed it firsthand. And that came from the US at the World Cup in 2010. I remember was a massive one. And then in 2014, I think it escalated even more. Genuinely, like, the 2014 World Cup, I genuinely saw people all around me watching the US in the group stage against Portugal, against Germany, that last minute winner against Ghana for Jonathan Brooks, like how close they came against Belgium with Tim Howe. Bro, I watched the country be like, they all fell in love with the national team, and for a month, they all loved football. The big issue was 2018, yeah? Just how I'm going to talk about in 2026, how big of an impact it could make. 2018 was a catastrophe for US football, US soccer. An absolute catastrophe. Them not making the World Cup in the manner in which they did too. Think about it, right? A lot of Americans, or your casual American that's not into football whatsoever, doesn't watch the Prem or whatever. The one time they actually tune in to watch this sport is during the summer every 4 years for the World Cup. That's like that little gap that you have the opportunity to make 2%, 3% more people interested in football. So if you miss that window every 4 years, like the US did in 2018, it was absolute catastrophic. Genuinely. Like, it was a catastrophe that the US didn't make it, but it was an even bigger catastrophe that 4-year window was wasted, because for a World Cup summer, casual American viewers weren't watching it. But this brings me back to 2026. If the US are able to have a successful World Cup, where the biggest stars in the world, the Jude Bellinghams, the Kylian Mbappes, who knows, maybe Messi and Ronaldo are still competing on it. If those guys are playing football games in their in everyone's backyard, kids, grown-ups, teenagers, they're going to these games, whether they're interested in football or not. A, those guys putting on a show, and then B, also the USA really making themselves held accountable at that stage has the opportunity to just basically gain a new 1,000 or maybe even millions of fans if the US really does well at this World Cup. That's how big hosting World Cup is. Because people, why do countries, for example, spend so much, bid so high to gain the rights to the World Cup, to be able to host the World Cup? There's a big amount of reasons, right? Obviously financial. There's some countries, in my opinion, that use it politically. Germany 2006 for me is like the greatest example of like a country hosting the World Cup, and that tournament basically helping completely change the way the nation was viewed by the rest of the world. I can go into that on a different day. But also, a big reason as well too, is a country like this, the US hosting the World Cup, what it can do for the growth of this country. But the big thing is, the US has to do well at this World Cup. Because as much as I'm bigging it up in terms of if they have a successful World Cup and they ball out and everyone is watching them at home and people are going to the games to root for them, on the world stage, it has the opportunity to completely change the way football is watched, played, consumed in this country. On the flip side, if the US flop at this World Cup, bro, khalas, it's finished, bro. It's done. It's done. Honestly, like, it's putting a massive, massive ceiling on how high you think it can go. And that's why the appointment of Mauricio Pochettino as manager of the US men's national team, bro, it is just that. Massive. Right? No disrespect to Berhalter, who was there before. But A, he's a relative novice. And B, you have the most talented, gifted US men's national team that I have ever seen. There's been some good teams in the past, right? The Dempsey era, the Landon Donovan era, Tim Howard in goal, all that stuff. It speaks for itself. They went amazingly far in tournaments, by the way. Quarterfinals in 2002. Obviously, the runs they went in 2014 and 2020 and 2010. But this group right now, bro, it's the most talented that they've had. All of them play in Europe. A lot of them play for Europe's big teams, not even just teams in Europe. And you look at the individual talent that you guys have. Musa, Pulisic, Tyler, like genuinely, this group is more talented than, in my opinion, any other group that they've had in the past. So to waste that group on, for me, what is an absolute novice in the form of Greg Berhalter was, for me, just a waste of time in everyone. And obviously, there's reasons why he was in the job. A lot of them is like politically, to be honest with you. I think his brother was basically on the U.S. men's national team board or something like that, the U.S. Soccer Federation's board. He basically got his brother into a job. But hiring a guy like Mauricio Pochettino is a massive statement, because let's also not forget about this. Just north of the border, you got Canada the last few years, who have been growing. Their program has been going up and up and up. They're producing and having guys play in Europe for some of the biggest teams. And they went and hired arguably the best American manager on the market, Jesse Marsch. Jesse Marsch is American. He's European proven. He's coached in the Champions League. He's coached in the Premier League. Love him or hate him, in terms of what U.S. American managers are out there, he's the best that the U.S. has. And he went to go manage Canada because the U.S. has Greg Berhalter. And you look at what Jesse Marsch has done in such a short amount of time for Canada, bringing them to the semifinals of the Copa America. It speaks for itself. For the longest time, Americans should be looking at that and saying, why isn't he our manager? But now you look at this appointment, Mauricio Pochettino. And I love or hate Mauricio Pochettino, right? Me, I've always been somewhat of a critic, to be honest with you. I think when it comes to the elite level managers in European football, I think tactically he's not at their level. And I think it's been found out a few times now at his recent jobs, whether it was Chelsea, whether it was PSG, and whether it was even his last year at Spurs. I don't think Mauricio Pochettino is, in my opinion, elite, but he is still a damn good manager. And one thing about Pochettino, right, even if you don't rate his tactics, like I'm not a huge fan of him tactically, but international football, we all agree, is largely predicated as well on being able to get a group together, being able to kind of have the dressing room on your side, and being able to platform your best players so that they can kind of win you games in individual moments. That's really what international football is. Mauricio Pochettino, in my opinion, that's his strength. He's not going to come in and get the U.S. playing like Spain. He's not going to be creating some crazy build-up patterns and passing team. But in terms of just making the U.S. tough to beat, bringing a good feeling around the squad, kind of bringing through these youngsters, which he's done throughout his career, and just giving the platform for his best attacking players to succeed, I think Pochettino has done that throughout his career for the most part. And I think for the U.S., I think it's the perfect job for him. I think it's honestly a match made in heaven. Genuinely a perfect marriage. It's a huge statement from the Federation, especially heading into the World Cup. And if I'm an American fan, I am super gassed about this appointment. Genuinely. So big up to the U.S., man. Big up to the U.S. I genuinely think this is an incredible appointment, bro. Do I think the U.S. can make the quarters? Why not? Why not, bro? I've seen the U.S. make the quarters in 2002. Genuinely, the luck of the draw is such that, yeah, why couldn't they? I'm not saying they're as good as Morocco. Don't get it twisted. But did anyone think Morocco could go to the World Cup semifinals? I didn't. Did anyone think Ghana in 2010 could make it to the World Cup quarterfinals? I didn't. Did anyone think Costa Rica could make it to the quarterfinals of the World Cup in 2014? I didn't. It's very realistic to make a deep run in these tournaments, especially when you look at how many teams are going to be in this 2026 World Cup. What is it, 42? 42 teams, I think. Anything's possible, bro. Anything's possible. However, there was absolutely nothing possible, in my opinion. No disrespect, but at the same time, full disrespect. There was nothing possible with Greg Berhalter at the helm. No chance. No chance whatsoever. Mohammed says, bro, it's growing crazy here. Well, 15 years ago, I was the only kid wearing jerseys in kindergarten, and now I go to the masjid or any school, and there's more soccer jerseys than any other sport. Now, I show speed, and a good World Cup can make this. Bro, this is what I'm telling you as well, too, man. This is what I'm telling you as well, too. I show speed. Like, people might laugh at that, bro, but he's genuinely changing the culture in terms of, like, how people from the U.S. digest football. Genuinely. People who love I show speed are, in turn, gaining an interest, no matter how small, in the players and in the sport he talks about. It might sound absolutely ridiculous. And 10 years ago, if you were to say this is what would help the U.S. kind of fall in love with football, people would call you crazy. But yes, it's kind of happening, bro. 48 teams. Excuse me. It's even worse than I thought. I say even worse. It's better in terms of for those nations. But bro, group stages are going to be a formality. Let's be real.